Welcome to the Backlash at Backlash.com. My name is Rod Van Mecklin, and in this video I'm going to read and comment on my 1992 article, Violence of the Rams. According to feminists, men are far more violent than women. For proof, they turn to government statistics indicating men commit most reported acts of violent crime. But their assertions are biased and racist, as becomes clear when we note that black men are arrested for murder and non-negligent manslaughter 9 times more often than white men, forcible rape 6 times more often, and aggravated assault almost 5 times as often. The source book for that was Criminal Justice Statistics, 1990, pages 422 and 424. Apologists might retort that arrests are not the same as convictions, and racism has to do with the disparity. They might be right. For the sake of discussion, then, let's assume this is true and throw out half the difference. Black male violence per capita still surpasses white male violence by a wide margin, and feminists know this. See for reference Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape by Susan Brownmiller, page 191. Despite that black men comprise only about 6% of the population in the U.S., they accounted for more than half of the murders in 1989, almost half of the forcible rapes, 41% of all aggravated assaults, and nearly half of all violent crime for that year. By the bigoted logic of feminists, this means black men are the problem and all women should fear them. But we can see with unbiased eyes that the violence black men commit is less a gender issue than an indictment of the social policies that rule and oppress blacks in general, and black men in particular. What's more, few men, regardless of their race, commit acts of criminal violence, even assuming the arrest statistics exclude individuals arrested more than once, and even assuming that every arrest leads to a legitimate conviction, that would still indicate fewer than 2 men in 10,000 commit murder each year, 3 in 10,000 commit forcible rape, and 3 in 1,000 commit aggravated assault. In other words, even if the feminist assertion that most rapes go unreported is true, we all have a far better chance of sustaining a permanently disabling injury in an automobile accident than women have of being raped, assaulted, or murdered. Hence, most of what we read and hear about male violence is a sexist, racist myth. That kind of gives new meaning to Robin Morgan's words, quote, "The attitudes of racism and sexism are twined together," close quote. Confronted with such bigotry, is it any wonder so many men despair? Male violence, hallmark of male despair. Men die, men kill. Men murder, rape, steal, and fight. In 1989, men accounted for 82% of all arrests for serious crimes. That was from the Statistical Abstract of the United States, 1991, 111th edition, page 183, table 307. Why are men so much more violent than women? If men really are more violent than women, maybe it's because men have tried to communicate with women and that many, finding they can't get through after a long time out of frustration, either take it out on themselves and become suicidal, self-destructive, or they rebel, challenging society, becoming almost terroristic. Is this an excuse, a flimsy attempt to dump male responsibility for social violence onto women? Maybe. But if so, then what should we make of the following excerpt from Cher Height's book, Women in Love? When you can't get through, after a long period of time out of frustration, either you take it out on yourself and become suicidal, self-destructive, or you challenge the society, and one way is to become terroristic. That was from Cher Height's book, Women in Love, which, as I've said in another video, might more appropriately have been called Women in Hate. Is this an excuse, a flimsy attempt to push female responsibility for social violence off onto men? Height was making a case for women to commit acts of violence against men and society, yet feminists commonly disparage men's violent nature. Quote, "The violence that men dream and the violence that they do ensures that they are lonely forever," close quote. And that was Andrea Dworkin from the book Intercourse, page 34. As Warren Farrell points out, in the context of sex, most men are virtually invisible. To most women, they're not really men, but more like drones, beings who look like men, use the same restrooms men do, but because they make good friends, they're not really men, but nice guys. During all the years feminists have been putting words to the frustration women generally feel toward men, many men have experienced an identical sense of frustration toward women. Is there a correlation between this and male violence? Could this violence indicate a deep-seated and well-hidden male despair? If men kill, then it's also true that men die. In 1988, American males in all age groups died on average at almost twice the rate of females. Again, from the Statistical Abstract of the United States, 1991, 111th edition, page 81, table 118. Additionally, white males had the highest suicide rate of all, killing themselves almost twice as often as black males, almost 4 times the rate of white females, and 9 times the rate of black females. That so many more men die from self-destruction than women do reflects not only the profound despair men in our society feel, but also their strength and moral courage. They could take this frustration out on others, on society, on women. Instead, many self-destruct. In 1990, there were a total of 30,780 mostly male suicides, as compared to 20,045 murders, because men kill themselves far more often than they kill others. That was from the World Almanac and Book of Facts, 1992, page 951. Sometimes suicide is a heroic act of self-control in response to female violence. Now I want to pause here for a moment and harken back to Christian Slater's great movie that he starred in, Pump Up the Volume. And in there, come to think of it, I think the character that committed suicide had the same nickname as somebody that either Bern Chapin or Aaron Clary, I think it was Bern Chapin, has been talking to recently. I am serious. And that character committed suicide because Slater's character didn't take him serious enough. So, look, just because I point out that suicide can be a heroic act, it doesn't mean that I'm encouraging anybody who's feeling suicidal, who's deep in despair, to go ahead and do it. No. I've been deep in the blues many times in my life. And whenever I start to really despair and feel like there's just no point in going on, I remind myself, yeah, but if I wasn't here, think of all the great Star Trek movies I'd miss out on, or the Star Wars movies I'd miss out on. I really like science fiction, good science fiction, stuff that's well done. And like Dune, oh boy, the Dune trilogy that was done in England, and the Children of Dune, oh my goodness. What's his name? John McAvoy was absolutely brilliant in the Children of Dune. That was an inspiring performance. Oh man. But anyway, so just think of all of the great things you would miss out on if you committed suicide. So don't do that. In Violent Women, a myth common in our society is that violence is uncommon in the female subculture. Quoting from Cher Height. It's likely that women do not become violent because their system, women's culture, allows for talking things out. This mythical nonviolence is a common theme in feminist writings. Quoting here from Carol Gilligan's book, In a Different Voice, while the truths of psychological theory have blinded psychologists to the truth of women's experience, that experience illuminates a territory where violence is rare and relationships appear safe. This perception of a territory where violence is rare is a myth perpetuated by how we ignore the mechanisms women frequently employ to commit violence. Although we seldom hear of women throwing rolling pins and frying pans anymore, women are still more likely to be child abusers than men. That was from the Handbook of Family Violence by Susan K. Steinmetz and Joseph S. Luca, page 241. And Steinmetz and Luca and, I can't remember the co-author of that, but all three of them were harassed mercilessly by feminists and received, all three of them received many death threats. And Suzanne Steinmetz was very willing to talk about it. And there should be video interviews of her. I know that there are written interviews with her where she says absolutely adamantly, yes, feminists frequently sent her death threats or threatened to kill her. Yeah, female culture, no violence. Right. So, Handbook of Family Violence, Suzanne K. Steinmetz, Joseph S. Luca, page 241. Women batter husbands 1.47 times as often as men batter wives. And as Mick Hunter notes, quote, society tends to view the sexual offenses of women as relatively insignificant, close quote. And that was from Abused Boys, the Neglected Victims of Sexual Abuse by Mick Hunter, page 39. Hence, violent and abusive behavior is more prevalent within the female subculture than most realize. Agency violence. Now, of all the vloggers I've listened to that I've enjoyed, Karen Strawn has talked more than most about agency violence. And Fred Hayward was one of the first ones that I heard talking about it. Warren Farrell also talked about it. Agency violence. Women also use men to commit violence for them. Consider the classic barroom brawl scene in which men fight with one another in response to the provocative behaviors of their bored female companions. Regardless of how we frame it, some women directly and indirectly employ men to commit acts of violence for them. Quote, fighting is a male role, but fight promotion is an equal opportunity, close quote. That was from Why Should Equal Rights Stop at the Tavern Door by Frederick Hayward. And that was in the now defunct Merge newsletter, November 29, 1988, page 9. Merge, the movement for the establishment of real gender equality, which feminists absolutely hated. I was a charter member of the first and only U.S. Chapter of Merge. Oh boy, feminists just hated that. Women don't always use men to do their dirty work. In 1984, 43% of victims of spousal homicides were husbands. That again from Handbook of Family Violence, Husband Battering by Steinmetz and Luca, page 241. And, as Susan Brown Miller notes, women can enjoy violence. Quote, I learned how to fight dirty and I learned that I loved it. Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape. Susan Brown Miller, page 453. If we think about all the ways in which women directly and indirectly commit acts of violence, the picture that emerges suggests women may be more violent than men. Ironically, feminists are urging women to become even more violent than they already are. In 1991, for example, at a conference titled Women in a Violent Society, Andrea Dworkin, author of Intercourse, called upon women to kill men whom the law had cleared of charges of violence against women. That was Canadian Press, Montreal Gazette, May 13, 1991. Rationalizing justifications. The pragmatist will always find a way to use high moral principles to justify violating those high moral principles. In Women in Love, this is precisely what Sherheit does, implying that men have made it impossible for women to use high moral principles to further their high moral cause. She, surprise, suggests fighting fire with fire. Quote, another way of changing the culture, then, is to have the kind of revolution that men usually make to take power, to force men, the culture to change. That was from Women in Love. Asserting that men are almost entirely to blame for social violence, that women have waited too long, and having asked if it's really possible for women to persuade men to give them their rights peacefully, she wonders, quote, what kind of fighting will really work? Her answer, there is no one way of fighting that is right. Finally, all ways are right. Being reflective, introspective, thinking, fighting, voting, running for office, boycotting products, as long as somehow one's voice is heard, one's opinion is registered. Here she reveals that, at core, violence is the true nature of feminism. So, here comes the tagline. Check out the other videos, subscribe to the channel. For the Backlash at backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mecklin.